of hair, and today I will be working with my canvas head, and I'm going to be making a lace frontal wig. And basically now I'm just showing you guys the front and back of the canvas head, and I will be working with my mesh cap. These are a size medium, and these right here is a size small. I bought the medium thinking that it would fit my head. Obviously it's just a little too big. So when I put it on a canvas head, as you can see, it's stretched just a little too wide for me. So I'm going to be working with the size small. This is the back of the mesh cap, which has a V, which lines up directly to the line that's on the canvas head. So if you want to just make sure that everything is lined up properly and that your wig that you're going to be making isn't twisted, you can just make sure that the V of the back of the mesh cap is lined up alongside the front area of the canvas head. So I'm going to be working with my pins. These pins I actually have with my sewing machine and when I go to pin my fabric together, but I'm going to be using it today to make my wig. The ballpark pins, you can also find these on Amazon along with the mesh cap. So I'm going to link the material that I'm using in this video at the bottom of the description box. So I pinned the front of the mesh cap down so I can make sure everything is lined up exactly the way that I need it to be. On Amazon, I also got a whole pack of sewing needles along with thread, which really came in handy. So as you can see, the lace frontal that I'm using, I already braided 2 cornrows to each side. So once I get to sewing and pinning down my lace front wig, no hairs will be in the way. So this is the way that I do my lace frontal wig. Everyone does do it different, but I just wanted to bring you guys me putting my lace front wig together. I make sure that there is no lumps, bumps, or spaces when I am pinning down my lace frontal wig, as you can see. I put a pin in the middle, and then I take my finger and I roll it down the lace itself to make sure that it's on there snug, good. Not too snug because that will make the wig go down a couple of sizes, but I do make sure that there is no lumps or spaces in my lace frontal wig. And I also put pins at the bottom. So altogether I have 3 pins put in, but I also placed another one in the middle because once I rolled my finger down, I seen that it was some space still there. And I just want to make sure that the lace frontal wig is on good. Anything that you may miss, you can always go back, rewind, fast forward, because this video right here will be a little lengthy because I want to make sure that you get the full details of me making my lace frontal wig. So now that the lace frontal wig is pinned down, I do make sure that there is an inch, that the lace frontal is an inch from the mesh cap. I don't line it up exactly the way. As you can see, I have it an inch down from the mesh cap. because some of the mesh cap will be cut off. The part that has the lace on it will be cut off, and I'm going to show you guys that as well. So once I believe that everything is on good and aligned appropriately or almost appropriately, what I'm going to be doing is drawing my lines on my mesh cap. What I'm using is a chalk because just in case if I mess with any lines or I wanted to close to my chalk, all I have to do is rub the chalk from off the mesh cap and make the line all over again. That's the reason why I use my chalk. Some people, as you see, they will use ballpark pens and things in that. I mean markers. I'm sorry, ballpark markers to draw their lines, which there's nothing wrong with that. I just rather use my chalk because if I make any type of mistake or want extra lines on my wig, I can do it with no problem. So as you can see, my lines isn't that close together, but it also isn't that far apart. And if I feel like I want extra hair into my wig, I can always just add extra hair once I complete my guidelines. These are my guidelines for where my track is placed. And the bundles that I will be working with is 3 bundles with the lace frontal. The lace frontal is 16 inches and the bundles are 16, 18, and 20, I believe. And I got it from my hair vendor. My hair vendor has great prices with really great quality hair. And that's the hair that I'm using to start my hair company as well, which is called She's Goddess Hair Collection. So I'm going to show you guys the bundles as well. So now that everything is secure and I have my guidelines of where I'm going to be sewing my tracks at, I'm going to get my hair ready, which is the 16, 18, and 20 inch from my hair collection. So my tracks, I make sure they are doubled because I want to make sure that I get in as much as hair as possible, because I do have the lace frontal up there, and the lace frontal takes up room from sewing in any tracks anyway. So what I want to do is double my tracks, and I go back if there's any hair that I want to add. So I take my thread and I make sure I have my knot. And the first track, I always make sure is going exactly into the track itself. And I take my pin and I pin down the opposite side from what I'm starting to sew from. So that way, once I start sewing, once I start sewing my tracks, everything will be lined up appropriately. I always start off with doing double knots inside of my tracks, and while I'm sewing, I also do knots as well as I'm going along the track. And once I get to the opposite side of the track, I remove the pin and I go ahead and I also sew within that track as well. And I make sure I add knots. I double knot it about 2 to 3 times to make sure that that track does not come out. I don't go constantly around with the track like I do when I'm sewing onto a person's head. I don't cut my tracks. I continue to sew. With this, I want my lace frontal to be as flat as possible. So I do cut the tracks at the end and go ahead and move on to the next guideline. Every track is basically sewn the same way. I put my pin in the opposite side from where I'm sewing at, and I start sewing, and I make sure that I put my thread in my needle inside of the track first, and then I go ahead and apply it to my mesh cap, starting off with a single knot, and then I do another knot. We want to make sure that our tracks do not come loose, because this video right here is not done with a sewing machine. What I wanted to do is basically show the people that does not have sewing machine how you can still do a lace frontal wig by hand. My next video that I do will be done with my sewing machine. Making sure each track is done securely is very important. So you go in, out, and out. You make your double knots within the tracks. While you're sewing, you can continue to make your knots or do 2 or 3 knots in the middle. And then once you get to the opposite side, you sew, and you also do 2 to 3 double knots on that end as well. You cut your track and you move on to the next. Okay, as you can see, my second track is completed, and I'm moving my way up to the third track. I'm going to be fast forwarding the video because the rest of the video will be just showing me sewing in each track until I get to the top portion. Now, you can sew down your frontal at the beginning before you even sew down any tracks in your head. But I decided to sew down my frontal now before any tracks get in the way of me getting this done. Now I do it the same way that I'm doing each track. I make sure at the beginning I do my single knots or double knots to make sure that the beginning is secure, and then I work my way around the frontal. As I'm working my way around the frontal, I also still put in a couple of double knots while I'm sewing in. So I also take the needle and go through the thread. like in the middle of the thread. That is also considered knotting. Make sure that you don't tug on the needle and the thread too much when sewing the frontal down, because that way you will be pushing the frontal backwards while you're pulling, and your frontal will be crooked. So you do it in a way where you're not pulling, and you move each pin while you're sewing. If the pin isn't in the way, it's fine. You can leave it there. Or if you feel like it will be in your way, you can remove the pin. That's a knot on top that I just did. And this is another knot that I did because I reached the middle of the frontal. As I work this opposite side, it's done exactly the same way I did the first side. I just make sure that I put my knots in as I'm sewing. And then once I reach to the bottom of this side of the frontal, I make sure I do 2 to 3 knots, removing any pin that I feel like will get in my way. And when I feel like I'm at the end of my thread, I usually go back up the side that I had already sewn. And then I cut it, and then I go ahead and I sew back in again. You want to make sure that you're sewing kind of close next to each other. You want to make sure your frontal is securely down. Now, I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing in the rest of my tracks. I did fast forward it, some of the video, as you can see. Right here, you can see that my track is just a little crooked, but it's okay. It is just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to sew in my track, starting off with a knot and moving my way to the opposite side. as I stated before, make sure when you're sewing your tracks in, you're not doing any pulling and tugging, because if you are, you're actually making your wig smaller than what it is. Okay, so what I wanted to tell you guys is that I make sure that when I do sew in each track, it actually isn't on top of the frontal itself. It's right before I get to the frontal. I make sure I stop sewing and I cut it and move on to the next one. So now I'm on to my second bundle, which is the 18 inch. I did not put in the 16 inch yet. So this is the 18 inch, and I make sure that they are doubled. And I still put in my pins on the opposite side from where I'm going to be sewing at. And then I start sewing and I make sure I do my double knot when I first start sewing. Making sure that each track is still secure, and making sure as I sew, I'm still adding knots into my wig. Because even though we're not using a sewing machine at this point, we still want to make sure that everything is done right. Sometimes when I get to the end of the thread, I go ahead and I make sure I grab another needle and start off where I left off at. Make sure if you guys have any questions or comments, or maybe if you can tell me something new that I can do to apply to making my wigs, you can comment down below. All is welcome. As you see, I put a double knot there in the middle, and I put another one in. And if you feel like that your tracks are put in too spaced apart, or you don't have enough hair added to your wig, don't be afraid to go back and go ahead and add in more tracks. So I'm going to continue where I left off at, sewing in and making sure that my double knots are done. Okay, we finally reached to the top of the wig. Basically, we have about 2 tracks left. And like I stated before, I may go back in and add about a track or two. I don't like for my wigs to be too thick. I like for them to be like a natural, not thin, but a natural look. So I will add probably like a track or two. And then I will come back and show you guys exactly how it looks when I do add 2 tracks. This is the first part of the video, which is basically just showing you the material that I use, how I sew in each track, how I cut out certain areas that don't need to be placed inside of making a wig. And then I will come back with a part 2 that will show how I style my wig. So my main objective here is just to basically show you guys how to make a lace frontal wig, how to sew it with your hands. You may see that I do sew my tracks kind of close. That's just something I do prefer. Now, as you see, once I get to the top of the wig, I try my best to stay out the way of the frontal because once again, any tugging or pulling on the frontal will slide the frontal back. Still making sure that each track is securely placed down, and I still do make sure that I do my knots on top. There is still a space on top, and that's where the last track will go. Okay, so now that we've finished that track, we're moving on to the top portion of the wig. And this will be the last track right here. Making sure that you try your best to avoid the frontal or sewing into the frontal. Okay, now we done reached to the last track, which is on the top. And as I stated many of times, try your best to avoid your frontal area. The more you avoid it, the more you can make sure that the frontal do not get pushed back. I start off this track just like I start off any other track. I start off with a knot. I'm sorry guys. I start off with my double knot, and I go in and I make sure that I do sew in securely, placing as many knots as you want as you start sewing from one end to the other. Okay, so now that we reached the end, I still make sure that I put in a double knot at the end, and I cut the remaining of the track that's left over. I'm combing any flyaways or any hair that may be stuck inside of the track area. Because sometimes when you do so, you do have pieces of hair that get caught up inside of the thread itself. And I usually just go through it with a little comb just to make sure everything is down. Okay, so that's done. I'm gonna take out my two cornrows that's on the side area. So this is the overall wig. This is how the wig came out. So this is the overall wig itself. As I stated before, this is just the first video of me showing you how I sew the wig together. And I'm gonna upload a second video which is gonna show how I cut and style the wig. Thank you guys for watching, and catch you on the second video.